The Americans for Prosperity's headquarters recently hosted its annual Capitol Conference in Washington via telephone. Jason Huffman, he is the state director in West Virginia. Good morning, Mr. Huffman. Great to have you back on the program.
Hey, great to be back with you. How you doing?
We're doing well. Are you in Charleston this morning?
I am. It is also a rather warm morning down here. I think it's going to be all week. So even the fish would be hot if you are fishing this week.
I think that pond is boiling this morning, Matt. Probably.
They come out ready to be put on the bun. You know?
They're like grill meat. It'll be cooler than the water right now. Yeah. We are already at 83, but it feels like 90 with the humidity in the Panhandle. Jason, while you folks were in D.C., you got an opportunity to meet with Senator Justice and also with Riley Moore. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we met with the staff of the rest of the congressional delegation. And really, I think, as you guys are probably aware, at the federal level, Americans for Prosperity's top priority is the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And this is the thing that is going to make President Trump's tax cuts from 2017 permanent. And I guess just to give a little background, across the nation we have 38 different Americans for Prosperity brick-and-mortar state chapters. And we have activists in all 50 states. This has been our singular goal at the federal level, was really working diligently to make sure that Americans' voices, the everyday person's voice, is heard on Capitol Hill when it comes to making these tax cuts permanent. We call it our Protect Prosperity effort. Really, I think by the numbers, it's kind of impressive. 70,000 letters that we've got from constituents to Congress. We've knocked on almost 500,000 doors, made almost as many phone calls, almost 700 events all across the country, some of which featured folks like the House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Speaker Mike Johnson. And really, this is a full court press effort because the stakes are really high in this particular scenario. If we do not pass the reconciliation bill, it's the largest tax increase in American history.
Yeah, it resets the rates back to where they were before this bill kicked in. What was it, 10 years ago?
Yeah, back in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so I had the opportunity to go up alongside all of our other Americans for Prosperity state directors from across the country and sit down with our congressional leaders and talk about the importance of this legislation. And really that's our opportunity to bring the voices, the grassroots activists that we work alongside every day up to the halls of Congress. And I think all told, my understanding is that we had almost 150 meetings with members of Congress in that single day. And so not too bad for a country boy. But in terms of, the discussions, one thing that was really, really clear walking out of those meetings, our congressional members and their staff, they get it. This is absolutely crucial. They're buying into the fact, and I think as President Trump aptly pointed out, it's either we do the biggest tax cut in American history or we do the biggest tax increase. Those are the stakes. You either vote for the bill and you're voting to cut taxes, or you vote against the bill and you let happen the largest tax increase in the nation's history. So they're absolutely bought in. They know it's crucial for the future of our state and our country that President Trump's tax cuts are made permanent. And really, failure to pass that bill, I think, in the eyes of at least West Virginia's congressional delegation, is just a non-starter.
As so often happens, Jason, unfortunately, that's not all that this One Big Beautiful Bill is about. If it were simply a thumbs up or a thumbs down on continuing tax cuts, it would be much easier for those who object to parts of this bill to swallow. And some who object to parts of this bill include several Republicans, not just Democrats on this one. There are a couple of poison pills on this that I don't particularly like. One is the 10-year ban on states to regulate AI. AI, we're quickly getting to the point with AI that it's making progress and gains to the point that human history will be changed in terms of what we need humans for. That is going to be something that changes monthly in terms of its advances. To go 10 years with no regulations on AI is flat out frightening to me, and that's part of this bill. And the other part of this bill that I don't particularly like is taking the contempt rulings from courts out of their jurisdiction as well. But courts don't have armies, so Contempt of court is the only way that they have to enforce rulings. If we take that away, then it's just, well, who needs to pay attention to the court today? They can't come get me. And that's another aspect of this bill I don't like. Were those two parts, as well as a couple of other things I won't get into right now for sake of time, were they not part of this bill, this would be a much more tolerable bill to me. We can get into talking about the deficit and the debt in this conversation if you like. I think that's fair game. But otherwise, these are some things that I would find as non-starters otherwise.
Rob, for you, brother, it's all fair game. We'll talk about whatever you want to, man. But in that regard, on the AI piece, it's actually pretty interesting. And I think that it's one of those issues that's not – I know I didn't understand it until, I got with a couple of the policy gurus on it so they could walk me through it. Essentially, because of the way that interstate commerce works, the Interstate Commerce Clause, all right, and because Silicon Valley is where it is in California, what we have is a situation in which if this piece of that bill is not included, what's going to happen is California is going to end up regulating AI for the rest of the country in a de facto sort of fashion. So what Congress is attempting to do is to even the playing field around AI regulation so that it's almost precluding California from setting the status quo for the rest of the country. There's a couple of ways that you can think about AI in terms of how you regulate it. There's the content piece, which obviously the First Amendment is fairly clear in its protections for how speech is leveraged, regardless of the technology, be it the printing press or an AI intelligence. But the other piece is essentially the models and the tech that is used to generate that AI. And so what I think my understanding, and again, this is not my top subject area, Rob, but my understanding is that what Congress is attempting to do is make it so that California isn't setting the stage for the rest of the country in terms of its regulatory environment. And that is probably positive because from a national security and from a competitive international standpoint, we need to be able to compete with countries like China on this technology and leverage it for good and not for ill. And so this is an important piece of that bill toward that end.
Yeah, I think that we could address California's control over AI separately without having to tie the hands of all 50 states for the next 10 years, though, Jason. My thoughts on that.
Well, and again, it's one of those arguments that is, I think, founded more so in the judicial and legal context. And so me not being a lawyer, I don't quite get it, but that's what I'm told it does.
Mr. Miller.
Jason, as far as AI goes, Rob uses some various clips each morning that are a part of our regular morning programming that deal with various technology and other information. And at least two of your programs this morning, Rob, you'll recall, mentioned AI and jobs that it's going to cost as AI has just progressed so quickly, especially in certain fields, like customer service was one that I noted this morning.
One AI chatbot replaced 700 jobs.
So in an organization titled Americans for Prosperity, AI seems to be a danger to some of that prosperity for a lot of Americans that may lose their job. What concerns do you have over what's going on right now with AI and what that could mean in the job field?
Well, I think, I always use the anecdote, perhaps maybe in a kind of a cheeky fashion, but if the horse and buggy lobby had their way, nobody would have a car, right? So to some extent, we've got to embrace the future technology that's coming down the pike at us. And like I said, try to leverage it for good and not for ill. One of the historical examples of kind of a pessimism about technology coming through to fruition and improving the lives of people, which is really what it's about at the end of the day. When Gutenberg made the printing press, there were a lot of folks that were scribes that were very upset about that because they knew that was going to mean changes in their industry. Does that mean that we shouldn't pursue that technology? No, it does not, certainly. And so I think, particularly if you look at the American economy in an optimistic fashion, think about it from this standpoint. We went through a pretty unprecedented time a couple of years ago where, the supply chain and the economic situation in the country was at a historic downturn as a result of the pandemic and some of the countermeasures, if you will, that were employed during that time by various states and localities, our economy is pretty elastic. It's pretty strong. It's able to snap back and be in a position to, I think, answer the call when changes come down the pike. Just like I think that AI is a tool for the future that, certainly will change the economy. But Americans are some of the most hardworking, lots of ingenuity in this country. I feel certain that we will figure it out, and we'll figure it out together.
The biggest part of AI that bothers me is no human on the other end. There's nothing more frustrating when you have an issue and you're reaching out to customer service and you get the press 1, press 2, press 3, and then press 1, press 2, press 3, and 25 minutes later, can I just talk to somebody, please?
That's why when you call this show, you'll always get a live host.
I don't know if that's more frustrating than when you get customer service that is overseas and they don't speak English well, and they also they're trained to be so rigid they just keep apologizing. I'm sorry for your time. I'm sorry this. I'm sorry that. But they're not helping you. I mean, I run a Medicare insurance agency, and I have my clients are calling these insurance companies. They're getting overseas call centers that I'd rather deal with AI.
Okay.
Because, at least they can understand AI. They're still not getting any help, but, at least we're
but they're less frustrated.
But at least we're keeping the money here in America then.
Well, let's get away from AI because that's not the primary reason why Jason Huffman called here. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Let me, if AI eliminates overseas call centers, God bless AI. Let me ask you this, Jason. What parts of the big, beautiful bill, and why do we go BBB? Build Back Better, Big Beautiful Bill, ridiculous. Should have had some other name to it. But what parts of the bill do you not like? I like a lot of the bill. What parts do you guys not like? What things would you like to see changed?
Well, I think probably a lot of the contention, particularly on the center-right sort of policy wonk space, and I'll get into that since Rob mentioned it earlier, is spending, right? There are some critics out there that say the legislation creates too much in terms of
hold
deficit.
on, Jason, I'm not asking about critics. I'm asking about your organization. What are parts of the bill that your organization doesn't like that it thinks it should be changed?
None. We love the whole bill. There are improvements that can be made, which is kind of what I'm getting to. But essentially, here's my standpoint. For the folks that are criticizing the spending piece, the fact of the matter is that our nation is $37 trillion in debt.
I noticed.
You cannot cut your way out of that. You have to grow the economy. To grow the economy, you've got to cut taxes, and you have to make those tax cuts permanent. So one of the improvements that was made to the bill on the Senate side versus how it passed in the House was the Senate language makes President Trump's corporate tax cuts permanent, whereas the House just extended them for another 4 years. That is crucial. It's crucial, and here's why. Otherwise, with those cuts expiring in 4 years, businesses don't make long-term investments on a 4-year extension of tax rates. They make investments in our country when they know they have predictability and permanency in the tax code. So what that's going to do is garner, I think, significant investment in our nation and our workers in this nation in the long term. And to lawmakers' credit, the House passed one of the largest spending reductions in memory recently with the rescissions package. And so that was, billions and billions of dollars worth of spending reductions, mostly on misguided foreign aid projects that, frankly, our country just can't afford anymore. In fact, Congressman Riley Moore is leading the task force for the Republican Study Committee dealing with rescissions and spending reductions. And so I can't think of a better guy with more common sense and principle to be in a position to go and do that. My point being, overall, we love the bill. There are things that could be improved always, but you don't let perfect be the enemy of the good when you're talking about stakes that are this high for America's future.
But it does still increase the debt and the deficit.
That is speculated, I think, but you always get into this conversation about static versus dynamic scoring. of legislation, the impact it's going to have on the economy. To be really honest, CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they don't always get it right. In fact, they were off by nearly $1 trillion in terms of growth when they scored the 2017 bill.
But I hear this, Jason,
I think it was a grain of salt.
I've heard this discussion every time a tax cut has been offered. If you don't like the way the math works out, you blame the CBO on it. And the CBO may be off by this or by that, but that's just hairspray. Each of these tax cuts has increased the budget deficit and the debt, with the exception of when Clinton was in his second term and he raised the top income tax rate and cut spending with welfare reform and a reduction in the federal workforce of about 400,000 people, which he spread out over about 3 or 4 years. At that point, we had a balanced budget, and we could have gone to work on reducing the debt. We didn't, because when George Bush II came into office, 43, he put in tax cuts and then created more government benefits with the prescription plan for Medicare, and the Department of Homeland Security was created, and then we had No Child Left Behind, and then we had. So here we are now, later on, not any closer, despite more tax cuts, to balancing a budget, and not really any closer to reducing spending. We've reduced a little bit, but not really that much in comparison to how much we actually spend. And we still have the baby boom going through Social Security. That's going to continue for another 20 years probably, because I'm the last of the baby boom. I'm 63, 64 is the end of the boom, and I'm not yet collecting Social Security. So I heard this morning on a report that in 2033, we've depleted the trust fund. That's a 23% reduction in Social Security benefits if we don't do something about that. So there's all these bills still waiting to be paid, and we keep thinking we can tax cut our way out of them. And I love tax cuts, but so far none of these tax cuts have reduced the deficit.
Well, and Rob, I think that's why I bring up the point at the beginning of this where I essentially said, you're not going to cut your way out of $37 trillion. Should we cut? Yes. Is Congress working toward cuts? Yes. To your point about reforms to mandatory spending, one of the things in this bill is a reform for Medicaid, which I know there's a lot of fear-mongering out there from sort of like the tax and spend crowd. But, when it comes to Medicaid, those folks have never met a tax increase they don't like, right? And so lawmakers have approached this, I think, extremely thoughtfully. And it's essentially, I'm glad you brought up Bill Clinton's reforms to it, because that's essentially what they're doing. They're creating a work requirement for the Medicaid system for folks who are able-bodied individuals without dependents, and that's essentially the Clinton-era reforms, by the way, that Democrats used to support and no longer do. The purpose of that is to safeguard Medicaid for the truly vulnerable by weeding out sort of like the waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. Some of the data that we've seen there, and this is why this is such an important reform, and I think gets to the point of what you're talking about, Rob, with mandatory spending. 1.6 million people are simultaneously enrolled in multiple states' Medicaid programs. So they're getting paid for care by both states. There's 1.4 million illegal immigrants that are eligible for the program currently and shouldn't be on it, and 1.2 million folks who are enrolled who no longer qualify for eligibility. And so there's scarce resources going to the country's most vulnerable, and by weeding out this sort of waste, fraud, and abuse in the system, standing up those work requirements, it helps solve for shoring up Medicaid, but also attacking that mandatory spending you're talking about.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. People who are capable of working should not be receiving benefits. The lazy should not be taken care of on the backs of those of us that work. That's wrong.
Yeah, but I've seen those numbers, and it doesn't take much searching to shoot some of those numbers down pretty easily. Well,
the one number that doesn't really cause anything is when you say people are enrolled in 2 states' Medicaids. That's just a clerical error. It doesn't matter if they're going to both states. The only time there's any money being paid out is if they have a medical service. And generally somebody on Medicaid is not going back to their previous state. So it's really not costing the previous state anything for them to be on Medicaid. People who have too much income shouldn't be on Medicaid. Medicaid needs to do a better job of recertification and making sure we get the people that don't deserve it off Medicaid and we get people back to work. And I believe tax cuts help that. I'm in favor of a lot of this bill. Obviously, I haven't read the bill. There's some of it that, I have not seen. Some of it I don't wholly agree with. But I agree with the fact that we need to grow the economy. I agree with you. We cannot cut our way out of $37 trillion.
Matt Miller.
Will the tariffs help to build this economy? Is a goal behind what the president is doing with those to try to bring back some of the manufacturing and other things that maybe have left this country and get them back here?
I don't think that they're going to. There are some folks out there, and I think perhaps maybe even the president included, that think that the revenues derived from tariffs are somehow going to be a replacement pay for the income tax. I don't think that's going to happen. I think what President Trump is doing is trying to strategically leverage tariffs in a way that are more of a diplomatic tool than an economic tool. And so the deals that you see him striking with various foreign countries to sort of, I guess, get more of an even playing field in terms of, you guys get rid of your tariffs and we'll get rid of ours. That type of setup, I think, is bearing some fruit. Tariffs end up being a tax on consumers if they are leveraged over a long period of time.
Amen.
Well,
so
hopefully they
I'm
cause
hoping
some
that the president is going to use this very, very strategically as a diplomatic tool. And so far, I think that is the case.
Well, hopefully they cause some more manufacturing to come back to America, more higher-paying jobs.
Those jobs will go to AI robots, John.
Yeah.
Jason, where can we find out more about Americans for Prosperity West Virginia?
You can go to americansforprosperity.org and take a look.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Hey, you too. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks.
Jason Huffman, State Director for Americans for Prosperity West Virginia.